Hello friends, in continuation of the instructional videos on the G100 inverter from LS brand, today we want to talk about the local remote feature on the G100 inverter. The second command source or local remote means that you can use a digital input by digital it between 0 and 1 to control the inverter from two different points, both for start, stop and for frequency setting. For example, in local mode, you can set the frequency from the inverter keypad, and in remote mode, you can set the frequency from a PLC, a network like HMI, or any other device such as a 4 to 20 mA sensor or a 0 to 10 V sensor. Using the local remote or second source on the G100 inverter, you can specify via a digital input by digital it between 0 and 1 whether the frequency reference comes from the keypad or something else, or in remote mode from the network or another source. Now, the settings we need to make on this G100 inverter. In local mode, if the digital input we've defined as the second source is inactive, to specify where our start-stop command comes from, we use the DRV parameter, and to specify our frequency reference, we use the FRQ parameter. So, DRV and FRQ are for local mode when the digital input is at logical 0 or inactive. But if the digital input we've defined as second source is activated, it switches to remote mode. In remote mode, the frequency and start-stop references are no longer set by DRV and FRQ. To specify the command source in remote mode, we need to go to parameter BA04, and to specify the frequency reference in remote mode, we go to parameter BA05. To assign one of the digital inputs, P1 to P5 on the G100 inverter as the second source, we need to go to parameters IN65 to IN69, which correspond to digital inputs P1 to P5, and set whichever one we want to use for this feature to value 15. So, the parameters for frequency and start-stop reference in local mode are DRV and FRQ, and in remote mode they are BA04 for command source and BA05 for frequency source. If we want one of the digital inputs to enable or disable the remote, we set one of the digital inputs to value 15. In this instructional video, we want to set the frequency for the inverter from 2 points. The first point is a 3-wire 0 to 10 V potentiometer, and the second point is a 2-wire 4 to 20 mA sensor. We want to use a digital input via a digital switch to send a command to one of the inverter's digital inputs, defining it as the second source. If this digital input is at 0, inactive, the inverter will get its frequency from the potentiometer. If it is at 1, the toggle switch is on, and the digital input defined as second source is active. The frequency will be set via the 2-wire 4 to 20 mA sensor. Let's go ahead and apply all the settings we've learned so far for the local remote or second source on this G100 inverter and test this capability together. As we said, for the frequency reference to be from the analog input 0, 10V in local mode, we need to set the FRQ parameter to set it to value 2. Here we want our local mode, meaning if our digital input is inactive, the FRQ parameter, which is the frequency reference in local mode, should be set to 2, so the reference comes from the 0 to 10 volt potentiometer. For the DRV parameter, in the main group related to local mode, we set it to 0, meaning the start-stop command comes from the keypad. For remote mode, as we said, we need to go to parameter BA04. BA04 is our start-stop reference, and we set this to 0 again, so the start-stop command in both modes comes from the keypad. But BA05 is the frequency reference in remote mode. As we said, in local mode, we want the frequency reference to be from a 0 to 10 volt potentiometer, and in remote mode from a 4 to 20 milliamp sensor. To set it to 4 to 20 milliamp, we need to set BA05 to value 5. For the digital input, as mentioned, we go to the IN group, and whichever digital input we want to use, we set it to value 15. Here I chose P3, which corresponds to IN67. I go into parameter in 67 and set it to value 15. This means that my digital input P3 determines my local remote mode. If it's 0, it's in local mode. If it's 1, it's in remote mode. In local mode, our frequency reference comes from the potentiometer. In remote mode, it comes from the 420 milliamp input. Right now, my digital input is inactive, so it's in local mode. If I adjust the potentiometer, you can see that my frequency changes. This is the local mode. Now let's say I have another operator or another section where they want to change the frequency using a current module, or I have a 4 to 20 milliamp 2-wire sensor. I activate my remote mode, and as soon as I do that, by activating my sensor, it switches to current mode. Now, as I increase the current value, you can see that as I increase the milliamp value sent from this device, my frequency value changes. So, in this video, we were able to use a digital input, which we had defined as the second source, to activate two frequency references for the inverter. If this digital input was inactive, the frequency would change based on the 0 to 10 volt analog voltage input, and if it was active, it would change via a 2-wire 4 to 20 milliamp sensor.